Hi there, my name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and I'm super excited today because I have an awesome project for you. We are making pencil cases, and they're not just pencil cases because really what I have in here isn't quite pencils, but it's all my various ScanNCut accessories. So they're great little pouches for you to put absolutely anything in. So when cutting fabric, you always want to use a fabric dedicated mat, and what that means is on top of this mat, I have put a high-tack fabric support sheet. So that means this is super duper duper sticky, so it's really going to hold the fabric. So what I'm going to do is I have a scrap piece of fabric here, which I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put down on my mat. Now I like to start at the end that's going to feed into the machine and sort of make sure that everything is on there. And then I smooth away from it. Sort of, I think of it as almost like finger ironing the fabric as I go, and if there are any little wrinkles, I can take them out. Now, if my fabric is, slightly larger and hangs off anywhere, I'm going to take a small pair of scissors and I'm just going to trim that off because I don't want any fabric to extend beyond that 12-inch square because it, of course, could get wrapped up in the mechanism of the machine, and that would be a travesty. So once that is all smoothed down and ready to go and really well adhered onto there, that's the key to cutting fabric, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to open the dust cover, and I'm going to load my mat into the machine. So now we're going to build our pieces. I'm going to choose pattern. In the basic shapes, I'm going to choose the square. Now I want it to be 5.5 inches wide, so as soon as I hit 5.5, then I'm going to turn off the aspect ratio button. And I'm going to raise the height because I want this to be 11.5 inches tall. Now these measurements are based on the size of pencil case that I want. If you want to make something bigger or smaller, you can alter them to suit exactly what you need. So I'm going to go ahead to 11.5. Now I actually want 4 of them, but I know that only 2 of them are going to fit on a mat. So for now we're going to say 2 and set. And the machine is going to have them set up right there. I'm going to go ahead and scan in my fabric to make sure that I'm going to place those exactly where they need to be and not waste any fabric or accidentally cut off the mat. So now that I can see it, I can see that I'm missing a little bit of fabric there, and I do need to just move things over slightly. Now, one of the things that I'll sometimes do when pieces are small, a little trickier, and I want to move them carefully and slowly, is I'll use these arrow keys, and I'll just go ahead and bump it over that way if I feel like my fingers are getting in the way. And you can always, always, always use the zoom tool to really super zoom in up to 400% to make sure that your pieces are cutting exactly where you want them to be. And you can see I just have the tiniest little hair over there where I'm missing, and I want to see if there's anywhere else that that's a problem. So then now I know I need to bump this over just a hair, and then maybe grab the other piece and bump it over a hair. And now if I zoom in, I can absolutely make sure that my pieces are going to be perfectly square, perfectly perfect, that nothing is going to be missing and everything is going to be fine. So once I am happy with it, then I'm going to go ahead and say okay, okay again, okay again. And now I always cut fabric at a cut speed of 1 and a cut pressure of 4. Those are the settings that I found have worked for me, but you should of course do a test cut for yourself. My blade right now happens to be at a 6. I know for some people fabric cuts better at maybe a 5 or a 4, but for me, for this blade, that's what it's been doing. And you'll notice it's a fabric dedicated blade. I only use this blade and this blade holder to cut fabric. So let's go ahead and press start. So now that I'm done cutting, I'm going to go ahead and remove my mat, and then I can pull away the excess fabric pretty easily. It just comes right off, and throw that away. And now I have my pieces. If I want, I can certainly use the spatula tool to help me get my fingers under there to sort of limit the amount of fraying, obviously, that happens. But here you go. There's my first rectangle. And then I'm going to get my tool under there, and there is my second rectangle. Okay, if you have stray little bits on the mat, you can get them up with a spatula tool, or you can use a baby wipe to just go ahead and clean off any threads that may remain. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply my second piece of material to the mat, same way I did the first, just by being really careful, starting at maybe one end and then smoothing it down, kind of finger ironing, the lazy ironing, and making sure that there aren't any wrinkles in it and that it's all really well adhered. And as soon as that's on there, I'm going to go ahead and repeat exactly what we just did with the last fabric so that I have a total of 4 rectangles. So now that I have my 4 basic pieces cut, 2 for the lining and 2 for the outside, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create the pattern that we need to do to create the overlay for the outside of the pencil case. So once again, I'm working on my fabric dedicated mat with that high-tack fabric support sheet on there. Now, I have some paper-backed fusible web on my fabric, and I want to put it so the fabric side is down and the paper side is up. And normally I would work with a larger piece of fabric so I could cut both pieces that we want at the same time, but I'm using scraps because I'm being thrifty, so I didn't have a big enough piece, so I'm actually going to do this twice with 2 small pieces. Before I cut, I want to peel the paper off the fabric. Now, I could have peeled it off before I put it down onto the mat. I just wanted to make sure I remembered which side had the fusible on it. So this is now on here with the fusible side up. And once that's good, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to load it into my machine. And now that it's all loaded, we're ready for the next step. So now we're building that outside, and I'm using little scraps of fabric, and so I don't have enough for 2 pieces to cut at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete out one of the rectangles that we created. Okay, so now I only have 1 rectangle left. Then what I want to do is I want to add, and I'm going to go to the built-in designs on the second page. There's a bunch of stencil designs, and I like these stencil borders a lot. I'm going to choose this one, number 2, right here, and I want to make it 11 inches because I know that my rectangle is 11.5 inches, so 11 inches is going to fit. However, I also need to rotate it 90 degrees, which I'm going to do right here so that it'll fit right inside. You can see there it is. I'm going to say set, and now the machine is going to put it right next to this, but I actually want it to be inside of here. But before I really get things set up, I want to scan in my fabric to make sure that I place those pieces perfectly. So now that the scan is there, I can go ahead and I can drag the design over, and I can drag the rectangle on over to make sure that they're both going to fit on there. I can put it, if I want to conserve some fabric, I can put it towards the edge, just like that. Now, one of these pieces is under the other one, so it can be a little bit hard to grab a hold of it. So luckily, I can use these arrow tools to shift which one I'm holding. And then, of course, as always, I can zoom in to make sure that everything is actually fitting right onto that fabric. So I can see it looks like everything is fine. It's a little close on the bottom edge there, so I might switch over to the other one and then use the arrow tools to just inch it up just a skosh, and then I might go ahead and say okay, go back to the other one, and then also inch that up just a tiny bit. And now I think we're ready to go. So if all of that is set, I'm going to cut my fusible, or actually my fabric that's backed with fusible at the exact same settings I used before. So all I have to do is press cut and start. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unload this from the machine, and then I'm going to peel away the excess. And you can see that when the fabric has fusible on it, there's virtually no fray. And I can go ahead and use my metal spatula to get under that corner. And then once you're under the corner, it's pretty easy to lift up the rest. Now I know this has a lacy design that came out of it, so we're going to be a little more careful in terms of picking it up because you don't want to rip it, although fabric is very hard to rip, especially with the fusible on it. So I'm just going to be kind of careful getting it out and go a little bit slowly around some of the delicate areas to make sure that I get it all up. So once it's pulled off the mat, you can see how cool and fantastic it looks. So I need to repeat this a second time so that I have 2 of them. And once we have the 4 pieces out of orange fabric and the 2 cover pieces that we've cut, then we're ready to head to the ironing board. So I'm here at the ironing board and I've protected my ironing board. Now you could use a silicone sheet or anything like that. I just have a piece of fusible backing that I just pulled off just so that no fusible is going to get on there. And I'm going to take one of the rectangles that we cut, just like this, just a regular piece of fabric. Then I'm going to take the fancy piece that we cut, and I'm putting it fusible side down. Now they're exactly the same size. They should both be 5.5 by 11.5. So once I'm sure that they're together and they're fine and I can see that little orange pattern peeking through the green, then I'm ready to take my hot iron, no steam of course whenever you work with fusible, and I'm just going to hold it in place in a couple different places just to make sure that I lock that on in. So this should just take a moment to do this, and I'm going to repeat that process with my second piece so that in the end what I'll be left with is I'll have 2 pieces of lining fabric and I'll have 2 pieces of outer fabric, which are actually made up of 2 pieces of fabric. Now, by adhering these 2 pieces of fabric together, what I've done is not only created this really cool decorative pattern, but I've also essentially made them stiffer and heavier so that when we create our pencil bag, it's going to leave a little stiffer exterior with some nicer corners. So now I'm ready to pin. So I have my lining fabric face up, and then I have a zipper. I like to work with a zipper that's longer than my fabric. That's just my personal preference, and I'm putting the top edge against it. And then I'm going to take facing the outside fabric that we created, I'm going to make sure that it is down, and it's going to go against the zipper, and so that these 2 pieces of fabric are completely lined up and the zipper sort of hanging out. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin all 3 of these together. And you know, I have learned in sewing that good pinning is the key to good results. It's one of those things where I'm not a huge fan of prep work. You know me, most of the time it's like whatever. But especially with sewing, I found if I do a little bit of a careful job of when I'm pinning, then I always get a really good result in the end. So I'm going to take a moment and just pin all the way down. Once this is all pinned, we're ready to head to the sewing machine. So I'm here at my sewing machine, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put this under. I'm using just a regular foot, and I'm just going to put it down. And I'm going to make sure to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. And of course, I don't want to sew over any of my pins, so I'll be pausing in between to make sure that I pull out those pins before I get to them. And then it's just a straight stitch right down that edge that we pinned. So I'm backstitching at the end, and then I'm just cutting my thread, raise the foot, and out she comes. And now I'm ready to go back to the ironing board and press it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm simply going to flip that top fabric over, create that nice crease, sort of finger iron it. Then I take the iron and I really go in there and make sure that that crease is nice and strong. Okay, and I think it's important to iron at all these steps because again, what I think this does is just give you nice, clean, easy lines so that the project turns out really well. And I'm going to do the same thing by flipping it over, and I pull the lining fabric the same way, and then I'm just going to again push on that crease with the iron to really make sure that that seam is nice and firm. And once all of that is ironed into place, I'm ready to start pinning again. So, to pin the next part, I'm going to basically repeat what we already did. I put my lining fabric down with the correct side up. Then I put the zipper onto it again with the correct side up. I am making sure that the fabric I've already stitched is centered over the fabric that's down there. Then I'm going to take my other piece, put it face down again so it's all lining up with the top edge of the zipper, and now we're ready to pin. So this process is pretty easy to remember because it just repeats exactly what you did before as you go. And then guess what we're going to do when we're done pinning? We're going to head back to the sewing machine and again stitch straight down this line. Press our foot down, go forward a few stitches, and then I'm going to go backwards a few stitches just to lock that in. And then removing the pins as I go, I'm off to the races. be sure to backstitch at the end, and once you have cut your thread, then you are ready to head back to the ironing board. So I'm back at the ironing board, and I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to finger press out that top layer so that it lays nicely against the zipper. Take my iron and then really get in there to make sure that that's nice and flat. And that's going to make the sewing that we do in the next few steps just go a little bit more smoothly. So I'm going to press that down and then flip it over and do the same with the lining fabric. And you can sort of see our pouches, it's really well, it's very close to being done. And that's one of the things that I like so much about this project is this is fast and easy, and you can see making these for the kids every year for school or for gifts. It'd actually make a really great teacher gift too, I feel like, because you could customize it with their name instead of a pattern or anything like that. But now, right, I have a big square kind of like this. So we're going to stitch the bottom together. So in order to stitch the bottom together, what I'm going to do is I want my two sides, and I'm simply going to fold it in half so that the lining will be on the outside. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and pin across the bottom and then take it over to the sewing machine. So if you have a lot of fray, you can feel free to use a very generous seam. So I'm going to go ahead and put this under my foot. And I want to make sure to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back to lock it in. And when that's done, I'm just going to sew down, making sure to pull the pins as I go. I try not to sew over pins because I find that's when you break your needle. And I'm sure to back stitch at the end as well, and then cut that off, raise my presser foot. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab a pair of pinking shears. Now, I used to think that pinking shears were purely decorative, but a friend told me that they're actually practical. When you pink an edge, like we're doing here, I don't even know if that's the proper verb, but when you cut an edge with pinking shears like this, it actually keeps it from fraying. So since this edge is going to be exposed on the inside, this is the lining edge that you're seeing here, I'm using the pinking shears just to stop that fraying from happening. If you had a serger or you were a fancier sewer or something like that, you could do that. But the pinking shears are just super easy and quick way to make sure that that seam's going to be okay. So now I am ready to start pinning the sides, but there's something I have to do first, which is I have to go ahead and really press out that bottom. If you wanted, you could flip this and you could take an iron and really press it, but for now I'm just going to use my fingers to make sure that that's kind of pressed out. And you can see that I've essentially folded this in half the wrong way, okay? So now at this stage, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to bring the end of the zipper inside. If you leave it hanging outside, don't make that mistake, because what will happen is you'll end up cutting off your zipper. So how I like to do that is I like to pin one side of the zipper, okay, just like that, just with the pins right through. It's a lot of layers of fabric, so you have to kind of push. That's why I like these ball head pins so much. Edge, and then I'm going to stick my hand into the sort of sleeve, so to speak, of the pencil case, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that zipper, and it can be a little bit awkward to get it, hold of it, to grab it, to pull it down. So you may need to, there you go, start it, and then you want to bring it at least halfway down. Then the next thing is when you go to pin it, it's really important that you make sure that these two pieces of the zipper are still close together and tight, because if they're not, the zipper won't close properly. So you want to make sure to pin that carefully and make sure that the teeth of the zipper are right up against each other. And then you can go ahead and you can pin the other side as well, though a true confession here is that I don't always pin it when I do that side of it, just because this side seems to not really come apart, but it's a good practice to get into. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and pin that. So we're now going to go into the sewing machine, and we're going to go ahead and sew down here. And yes, we're going to sew right over the zipper. My one word of advice is just to go a little bit slowly when you get to that zipper and you're about to sew over it. And that should avoid any broken needles. So I'm just going to go ahead slowly, do a back stitch to make sure that I lock everything in, and then forward again. And of course, I'm removing the pins as I get to them to make sure that I'm not sewing over any pins. And then when I go to the zipper, I'm just going to go slowly and carefully. I'm not going to go flying over that area. I just want to make sure that everything's okay. It's also just extra bulk and all that kind of stuff too, and you always want to go a little slow over those areas. And of course you want to use a sewing machine that you're sure can handle all of this fabric, because we've actually got so many layers of fabric plus a zipper, so use something that's a really good quality machine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clip that and pull it out, and then just take a peek to make sure that I made it over the zipper and everything looks fine from both sides. And if it does, then I can go ahead and I can take my pinking shears, and now I am going to cut off everything. I'm going to cut off including the excess part of that zipper. So you need a little muscle. Sometimes I even two-hand the pinking shears to make sure that I get through there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just keep going right over it, and then that seam will be completely done. So there you go, that's all pinked. So now I'm ready to put the other side in the machine and do the exact same thing. And I check my stitches to go over them to make sure that everything's fine. If you feel like, I feel like my stitches are a little long there, one of the things that you can do is you can put it back into the machine, and you can do a couple stitches backwards and a couple stitches forwards, and just go over it one more time to really make sure that it's secure, because that's a functional and working part of the zipper, so that's why it's important that it looks good. So once you're happy with it, then of course you're ready to cut it off, knot it, pull it on out of the machine, and use those pinking shears to clean up that edge. Once that's all done, we're almost done. We just have one more step. You want to go ahead and make sure that you actually unzip the zipper all the way, and this can be a little bit awkward. I'm trying to face it towards the camera so that you can see that, but basically I've unzipped this all the way. Then I have two corners on each side, and what I want to do is I want to flatten the corner. So I'm just going to go ahead and flatten it out like this, so you can see it looks like so. Okay? Then I'm going to take a ruler, and this is sort of arbitrary. I've just decided that the width of this ScanNCut ruler is kind of perfect, and I am going to use a green marker because you can see it that way, but you could use a marking pencil or something like that, and I'm just going to draw a line right across that corner like that, so that the ruler is essentially measuring from the edge of the zipper to the edge of the ruler. That's where the line goes. And I'm going to do the same thing now on the other corner right here. Take my ruler, my arbitrary marking right there to know exactly where on the corner I want. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to put this into the machine, and I'm going to stitch down that green line. Flattening this out, getting it ready to sew. And then I'm going to place my foot down over the green line, stitch forward a few times, stitch backwards a few times, stitch forward again, making sure to go slowly when I go over that seam area. I'm just stitching straight down that green line. Again, back stitch to lock everything in, and then clip those threads, raise the foot, and pull it out. And I'm going to repeat that now on the other side. Clip my thread, and now I'm going to repeat that whole process on the other side of the bag. Now I'm ready to clip any stray threads that may exist, anything I see that sort of bothers me that looks like a little thread. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab those pinking shears, and we're going to cut off the corners with the pinking shears to make sure that we're stopping the fraying in those corners, and it just does give it a nice decorative edge. And I have to tell you, I don't even mind the green marker lines that are on here, because this is inside, it's going to be the lining, and the outside of this is orange and green anyway, so it kind of matches. But if you're worried about it, you know, feel free to use a water-soluble pen or a heat-soluble pen or just a chalk marking pencil, something that's not going to show up. So this is the exciting part where you get to turn it right side out and see the magic that you've created. And you just poke the corners out with your fingers to really just get them nice and tight. And I'm just going to go ahead doing that. And the fabric that we created really makes this bag so nice and stiff so that it holds its shape really well, which is great. And then we're going to go ahead, and you can see when you zip it up, it looks so cute, so cool, so absolutely beautiful, so uniquely cool. I love it. I think it's awesome. So a couple variations to think about. So I did the same thing where I created the 2 layers of fabric, but I used I actually used 4 different fabrics to do it. So you can see it has a very different look. Plus I added some foiling. This variation, instead of adding the second layer of fabric, I just added text, and this is cut with a ScanNCut, and this is cut with a ScanNCut. And here is one that I made where it's just painted fabric, and it's much floppier. It doesn't hold its shape as well, but still a really fun way to make a pencil case. So I hope that you will use your ScanNCut and a sewing machine to make an absolutely amazing pencil case for yourself or someone else in your life. For more tips, tricks, and tutorials, be sure to visit my website at balzerdesigns.typepad.com. And of course, don't forget about the ScanNCut website at scanncut.com.